for me, realizing that the divine isn't scared of our dirt and our dust and our flaws and our sicknesses and our illnesses the way I think the church is so obsessed with sin, right? We're just staring at that all the time, and we're so convinced ourselves that God hates that and wants to purge us of that. But it's a never-ending cycle of doom because it never gets done because we are sinners. Like that's all we're going to do in the eyes of the church.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Evangelical Podcast, where being labeled a heretic is a good thing, if it means refusing to conform to toxic, harmful expressions of faith. We address your questions about God, politics, how we got here, and how to move forward. Nothing is off limits in our conversations with scholars, spiritual seekers, and activists in our quest to uncover the heart of faith. We're your hosts, Melanie
and Gary Allen,
and this is Holy Heretics. Leaving evangelicalism is tough, but it can be even tougher when you're just full of questions, especially questions about the text upon which your faith used to be based. If the Bible isn't what we were taught, what is it? Does it even matter anymore? If it's not the Word of God, can it be trusted? Is it okay to just not read it anymore? Spoiler, it is. Our brand new digital course, Making Sense of the Bible Post-Deconstruction, will be a safe place to ask these kinds of questions and to learn more about the history of this complicated text while dialoguing with other evangelicals about the experience of letting go of this black and white framework in favor of a more nuanced and loving one. Join us live in July for an incredible journey through the Bible. For the time being, this course is only open to Patreon patrons, so if you're interested in how to make a sense of the Bible post-deconstruction, head to www.sophiasociety.org and click on the banner at the top to learn all about the course and how to become a patron. But don't wait, because registration for the course closes July 1st, 2021. Today we're chatting with two people who know what it feels like to be outsiders. Flamy Grant and Ben Grace. Flamy Grant is what happens when a queer kid with dreams of being a pastor keeps getting kicked out of church. She becomes a singing, preaching, polygender drag queen who creates a podcast about apostasy. And Ben Grace was raised in a divergent sect of Christianity called the Christadelphians, but left Australia to write songs about our universal search for belonging, spiritual homecoming, and desire to live seen and unashamed. Together, they are half of the host team for Heathen Podcast, where for the past 5 years, they have been hosting safe space for folks in the process of moving away from their religious origins into uncharted territory, providing resources and welcoming uncomfortable conversations about identity, faith, patriarchy, race, spirituality, and what it really means to do community without shame. What a mission. So welcome to both of you. Thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us. And isn't Karen just the best wordsmith that we have on our team? We didn't write most of those words. Most of that we got to give credit to Karen for. But yeah, thank you for having us.
All right, so Flamy and Ben, my guess is we could go in 1,000 different directions, but let's just start with something simple. Can both of you share just a little bit about your spiritual journeys and why you wanted to either start or be a part of Heathen Podcast?
We can. Do you want me to kick it off, Ben?
Sure.
All right. Okay, here we go. So I'm Flamy. That's my drag name, my stage name, and the name I use on the podcast as well on Heathen. I grew up in Western North Carolina. Grew up in a church tradition called Plymouth Brethren. It's not what you think it is based on that name. There's nothing to do with the Brethren Church, and most folks just haven't heard of it. It's really small, but it's about as fundamentalist, conservative, literal, biblical, interpretive kind of situation you can get into. I grew up, believing that my mom and my sister were somehow lesser because they weren't permitted to speak in our church. They had to cover their hair, cover their heads. And then I grew up with this complex just because I had a penis, that I was going to be somehow a major leader in the church, and like that was just going to be a role that was destined for me and what was expected of me. So, as you read my short little bio there, didn't work out that way. I spent a good couple decades in the church, just trying to find my place, and I wanted it. I wanted to be there. I wanted to. I did have a passion to be a part of just making people's lives better. And because church was the only context I ever had growing up, it was the only option ever presented to me. It's what I pursued for a long time. And I did that through church planting, through worship leading, being on staffs at mega churches, being on staffs at a teeny tiny startup. And it just, never fully worked out, because my journey over the course of a very long time, led me to come out, and in stages, coming out initially, just kind of admitting to a few close friends that I struggle with same-sex attraction, all the way to, trademark, all the way to, finally accepting myself for who I am, and choosing to actually date people of the same sex as me. And at every point along the way, I found those pressure points in the church where I was pushing boundaries that were too far. And I got kicked out of a couple of them, including the one I helped to start. And at some point, I just had to. I still have the drive. I still feel compelled to be a part of the spiritual conversation, and to. I've never been a butt in a seat. I can't do that. I have to participate. I have to be part of the making of the thing. It's just what I do. So how I'm wired. And I was like, well, if nobody's going to let me be a part of what they're making, I'll just have to make something myself. So I started Heathen in, I guess that was 2017. And it was mostly just to help answer, to give me space to answer the questions I was having, to process stuff out loud and with other people, because that is also how I operate. I'm very much an external processor. I don't know how I feel until I talk about it. And so I just called up a bunch of friends that I'd met along the way, and folks who'd been on similar journeys as me, people who'd left the church, or just, who I knew had issues with the church, or, had experiences that were comparable, or things they wanted to talk about. And eventually that led me to Karen, who became my co-host in the second season of the podcast. And of course, through Karen, we met Ben, and our lovely friend Anissa has joined. And we just have a lovely little crew of people who are hanging out. We talk to, just like you guys, we talk to folks from anywhere we can find them, who have interesting stories to tell, or things to say. And it's been great to feel like I'm part of something that is moving people forward in a way with their own spirituality. And I feel like the whole dream of being a pastor, I can do that in drag, it turns out, and and do it better, honestly, than I ever probably could have in other scenarios. So that's my little quick and dirty.
And for those listeners who haven't counted Flamy Grant before, you should also get onto TikTok and see Flamy Grant on TikTok. The platform that they're just crushing on there is amazing. And I think it's a real testament as well to the people who respond, and the people who come back and talk about how it's so needed to hear these words from a drag queen, and just how it reframes so much of that stuff. And I think a lot of spiritual communities are obsessed with reframing, and I think that it is really, really different, the message coming from really divergent spaces. Like that's what got me really curious.
So what about you, Ben?
What about me?
What's
right.
your background?
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for that plug. But talk about you now.
All right. I'm Ben Grace. I was born in Sydney, Australia, into this tiny little community called the Christadelphians. There's about 50,000-ish worldwide. So very similar, I think, to Plymouth Brethren. Flamy and I have bonded a lot over our experiences as children. Be like, wow, this is so similar. It comes down to the oppression of women. That's kind of a central kind of obsession with the Christadelphian faith. And and they're very proud of the fact that they're not like other Christians. They're non-Trinitarian. They have a bunch of beliefs, some of which actually are kind of good. Like they don't believe in a supernatural devil. The problem is they put all that shit onto us, so we are the absolute scourge, and we are completely sinful, and there's nothing we can ever do about it. So I think I remember for me, kind of when I was 11 years old, I was sitting in a particularly boring sermon, and I started flipping through the book of Isaiah, and we were obsessed with Bible marking, all the Bible marking pens and the crayons and the whole thing. So inside my leather-bound, wide margin Oxford King James version, I actually had a pink pencil, and I started coloring in justice in the book of Isaiah. And by the end of the sermon, when we got up to sing like the hymn right after the sermon, I just looked around my white middle class church, and it all just changed in my head. I was like, I just don't think any of these things are represented here. I think the God of the Old Testament, that was always preached as being sort of out to get you, and you had to like obey and be obedient and by all the laws and live by all of these things. That they definitely had a big like Old Testament wet dream. The Christadelphians, they loved all the animal sacrifice and all that kind of stuff. But I'm like, I don't think that's really kind of what the divine is about. I mean, the divine is about justice for the poor and the marginalized and the outcast and the people on the fringes. And I looked around my white middle class church, and I couldn't find those people. I think they were there. I know that they're there now. I know that a lot of them were sitting closeted in their seats, and a lot of them were sitting quietly. And a lot of the women, because they didn't have to speak, because they weren't allowed to speak, harbored their doubts and harbored their deeply held beliefs, silently. So yeah, I'm sort of a disruptor. I'm a songwriter. I kind of set about to my first kind of attempt to reform the Christadelphian faith was to start writing and recording original music, which got me more than almost stoned on more than one occasion.
Gosh.
I got known as the guy who divorced his parents, because when I got married the first time, I changed my name from my birth name, and that didn't go down well with the family, and it was just rumors everywhere. I was just simply because I wanted to write and find an original voice for myself and for my community. I got a lot of shit out of that. I eventually left that community in my early 30s when I moved to America. And I think partly my ex would say, one of her strategies for moving to America was just to get me out of this endless cycle of just giving myself over and over and over to the church. Like I just was an Uber volunteer, because no one got paid in the Christadelphian faith. So I just spent every waking hour trying to build something for that community, and just dealing with a heartbreak over and over again. And so I eventually kind of got out and wandered into the doors of a church in Manhattan, which I didn't know anything about, evangelicism or any of that kind of stuff. And got asked to be on staff and start a brand new church. And in the middle of all that, I was deconstructing and told my boss, and he was like, "Yep, me too. Like, I don't believe half the stuff." So we created the very first open affirming evangelical church in New York that was super culturally diverse, and but then I eventually got kicked out of that too. So so it's been a long journey for me of just trying to find my own belonging, and kind of that. I think for most of my life, I have scrabbled after affirmation and scrabbled after a sense of who am I, and where do I fit, and where's my tribe, and where are my people. And I think being invited into Heathen and being invited to these stories has been such an honor, because I think I find that thread in most of the stories we hear. I find in all of us, like, the universal thing is about how we want to be seen and loved and known, and we've just used, in faith communities and in religion, we've used external things to suppress the internal truths, and we've kind of sold ourselves out for a cheap belonging, rather than kind of really kind of teaching people to love themselves, to know themselves, and to be fully who they are.
Yeah, I 100% agree, because I've been on my own journey, but even like hearing those words, there's a part of me that's still like, well, I'm sinful, so I can't love myself. Or I want things that are sinful, and therefore and it's very much like this self-flagellation that's just so indoctrinated into us that even like hearing love yourself just sounds like sacrilegious. So I love that. Flamy, I'm going to ask you a question because you often describe your deconstruction journey as one of liberation, which I think is interesting because that's kind of a word that people use when they talk about, quote unquote, getting saved. They'll say like, oh, I've been liberated from my sin now. So I'm curious, do you use that word intentionally? And either way, what do you feel like you were liberated from by going through deconstruction and getting out of that more fundamentalist faith?
Freedom, yes. Liberation. I do use that word intentionally. And actually, I use it intentionally, but maybe not in the way that I think it's hitting with you, which is interesting to me to think about for probably the first time. Again, I don't have a whole lot going on internally. I need to talk about things to understand them. So it's really fun to hear things bounce off of other people for me a lot. But the whole how that contrasts with liberation in the eyes of evangelicalism. I don't know that I've ever thought about it that directly, but yes, for me, the liberation all comes down to the oppression that I didn't know I was in for so long. Because I think, one of my favorite movies is The Truman Show, and I just love that quote that I'll butcher right now. But the one where Ed Harris says, well, we're presented, we accept the reality with which we're presented, when he's explaining why Truman never questions the weirdness of his scenario. And I think that was, I just related to that. For me, that was a movie, was a huge thing. Something clicked when I watched that. I was like, oh my gosh, am I Truman? Am I on TV right now? Are people watching me?
People watching you?
Yeah. But it was that kind of, what is this world that I live in, that this is what I've been presented with, and I don't know anything else. And it was a really slow, again, process of encountering what life was like for other people. And it just started by going to Gary Allen. We've already talked about our East Tennessee ties that we share.
Yes.
I went to King College, now university. And despite the fact that it's a small Presbyterian, school, I still was able to encounter a ton of people who had different backgrounds than I did. Because up to that point, my world was our little Plymouth Brethren circle. And like, my mom was a teacher at our Christian school. Like, there was nothing divergent about my experience at all. And so even just meeting people from different denominations in college was kind of eye-opening for me. And one of my best friends from college, who's still a best friend, who's actually been on our show, she was a new Christian when she came to King, and had been, she believed in evolution still when she showed up at King College. And to me, that was just like this.
Yes, that's scandalous.
Yeah, I was like, this girl's not fully saved yet. Y'all, we got to get to work. We got to do some work.
Pour some water on her head or something, right?
And so that kind of stuff, just being exposed to anything other is what finally made me realize that I was actually under some deep, dark oppression. And of course, coming to terms with my own identity was the biggest part of that. I have said a lot on our show that I don't know that if I had been born heterosexual, cishet, like I don't know that I ever would have challenged anything, because other than the fact that I'm queer, everything was working really well for me. Mm-hmm. And I fit in great in the world that I was born into. And I knew how to I knew how to play that world. Like I knew how to be a character in that game and to win it. You know, I was the golden boy in our church. I was always a good student. And then I was also had this like, you know, the spiritual, whatever anointing that folks, especially adults, always seemed to see in me. And like, I remember one time our principal, like I gave a little, a devotional at chapel. I went to a Christian school. We had chapels and I gave a devotional and the principal went up to my mom afterward and said, that Matthew of yours, he's got wisdom beyond his years. And my mom told me he said that. And I just like, you know, puffed up and I was like, yes, I'm destined for great things in the church.
And you had a penis.
I had a penis. So what? And I'm white. Like, like everything's going my way. And until, you know, I watched Saved by the Bell and Zach Morris came on the screen and AC Slater in his old tank tops. And I was like, oh, something's wrong.
Oh, really?
Something's off here, you guys, because I know I'm supposed to be looking at Tiffany Amber Thiessen, but my eyes are drawn to the other side of the screen.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So, it was truly my queerness that was the key to my liberation. And it was the thing that, because it was the square peg that didn't fit in the round hole, I had to find the place where I did fit. And that meant unshackling myself from a whole system, a whole world, everything, you know, that I had ever known. And realizing and being able to call it what it was, which was oppression. You know, I thought it was good. I thought it was community and I thought it was love, and it just wasn't. It wasn't those things. It was all conditional. All of it was conditional. And so yeah, I do like the word liberation, because when on the rare occasion when I do read anything from the Bible anymore, I'm struck by, especially like in the Psalms, when we read about freedom and liberation and oppression, I'm like, all of that stuff now, I just relate all of that to evangelicalism, like the oppression that the enemies, like all of the talk about my enemies, like I know who my enemies are now. I know who was trying to gaslight and manipulate me. And so yeah,
they've revealed themselves.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because what you just said kind of comes back to what Ben was talking about, is there is this subversive thread, not only in Scripture, but in Christianity in general, where there is a prophetic voice. There's a voice of the outsiders. There's a voice of the marginalized and of the oppressed saying, hey, this is the actual real story. That God that you guys have created, that God of conformity, that God of dualism, the God that hates seemingly all the same people we hate. Wow, what a coincidence. That God is a false idol. And yet we continue, because if you grow up in the center of culture, if this system is benefiting you, why in the hell would you question it, right? I mean, why? Yep. Because it's made for you. It's not made for the outsider. And once you start asking those tough questions, like, hey guys, why do we all look the same? Why are we all forced to believe the same? Why are we kicking people out? Is this a cult? Is this about conformity, or is this about real authentic community? And so, Ben, I want to kind of take that and ask you a question about the notion of community, because in your deconstruction process, you seem to be a little bit different than some of us who left a community, and we now find ourselves sort of spiritually homeless or without friends. From what we know of you, you talk about the fact that you deconstruct and actually found a community. You found a community consisting of, you know, a bunch of other people who had been discarded, who had been kicked out. Can you talk about how that community continues to shape you and change you as it relates to being fully human and maybe even a part of, you know, your journey right now spiritually?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel so similar to Flamy on this front. We've talked about this over and over again, that Toka Paterno, actually, in a book called Belonging, which we read together year and a half ago, I guess. Has some incredible things to say about belonging, obviously, because that's the title of the book. But she kind of talks about how often communities, and particularly faith communities and religion, force us into a false sense of belonging. And that's that we have to give away parts of ourselves in order to actually to participate. It's conditional, as Flamy said a second ago. And I think what I found when kind of the wheels fell off my life and everything just kind of turned to dust a few years ago was that some of those people fell away. Like, it's sort of funny that the prodigal son story, which gets told like ad nauseum in Christian faith, it's fascinating to me that when my life hit the skids, a lot of these friends, this community, turned their back on me. And what I found instead, though, was a bunch of people who weren't afraid to look in the darkness, and a bunch of people who sort of, in this very quiet and assured way, kind of said, me too, you know? There were people whose marriages had fallen apart. There were people whose queer identity had got them kicked out of their place. There were people whose race and ethnicity kind of meant that they never felt the comforts of privilege that many of us walk among. And those people kind of caught me. Like, I think I was exceptionally lucky. I don't think I knew what I was looking for. I was just flailing around like a fish out of water, honestly, looking for kind of sense of belonging. And some of those people were just calm and consistent and just not afraid of the crap. And I think that the biggest truth that I'm finding in community, and I'm still working on it for sure. I don't think I've kind of really got a handle on it. I think something you said earlier, Melanie, kind of really resonated with me. This idea that like self-love and actually hearing "I love you" and actually believing it is something that I struggle with so deeply. But I think the people who are just consistently there for you in the crap as well as the good times, you know, that's kind of what community is. And you know, I got lucky, honestly. If I just through Karen and dating her, and found myself in the center of Sojourn Grace Collective, this weird little unicorn church community that sort of exists out here in San Diego, where many of us here have been on staff at church, and many of us have been leaders and deconstructed and been pushed out of our communities. So we're just a bunch of church survivors, really. I know that's not everyone in the community, because there's plenty of people who say, I never had that experience, but there's a lot of us out here. And I think that people who are just kind of like, you know, whatever, just be who you are, like just show up, like there's no conditions except for like, be here, be with us. Like don't kind of try and disappear. Don't do the vanishing act. Don't do that kind of hide and seek thing. Just like show up in all of your glory. And it's going to be okay. And I think that's the biggest thing, is just realizing that the divine isn't scared of our shit and isn't scared of our dirt and our dust and our flaws and our sicknesses and our illnesses, the way I think the church is so obsessed with sin, right? We're just staring at that all the time, and we're so convinced ourselves that God hates that and wants to purge us of that. But it's a never-ending cycle of doom, because it never gets done, because we are sinners. You know, like that's all we're going to do in the eyes of the church. And I think to be in community with people who just see you as a whole person who's in the process of integrating and healing and trying and failing and falling and getting back up again and doing it again and just cheering you on in that process. Like we all just need cheerleaders. And that's, you know, where I feel like I found myself at the moment, and where I feel like Heathen sits as being a cheerleader for other people's stories. And it's an honor and privilege to be included, quite frankly. I just feel like it's a really low bar. We just need to make sure people know that they're okay.
So let me ask you a question about that, because for those of us, and I'm going to make some huge geographical stereotypes here, but for those of us who live out west, Colorado, maybe for Melanie in New Mexico, although that's sort of its own hybrid of strangeness, but in particular California, like these communities are they're there, they're known, and there are, to use the word again, subversive communities that are popping up that you can join. However, for maybe Flamy and I, who grew up and lived in East Tennessee or parts of the Midwest or some of these flyover states, these types of communities are either non-existent or they are suppressed. So if I'm somebody listening right now who's like, look, I've deconstructed, I no longer fit because of my sexuality or all the things that are not accepted in the church, where do I go for community? Because I don't have a unicorn church on my corner. I've just got the Southern Baptist Church. What suggestions can you give for individuals who kind of find themselves still in a suppressive community, but have already either opted out or been forced out of their spiritual community?
Oh man, I mean, it's a huge question.
Yeah.
On a very practical level, there's progressive church locators online. If you search progressive church locator, you will find resources. I think there's a Convergence. It's an organization that has a kind of, on their website, they have a tool for that. And I think, well, I guess let me answer the question this way. I know a lot of people who fall out of this stuff get tempted to start something.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to relieve you of the feeling that you have to do that.
Mm.
You have a long way to go. There's a lot of stinking trauma to work through, and you don't have to fix it and save it yourself.
Mm.
So I know it can feel lonely for sure. I mean, for me, I kind of felt this incredible loneliness. I mean, I kind of wandered through a bunch of different traditions, and I found myself drawn to sort of Franciscan theology at some point, then realized they were also called heretics by the Catholic Church for years. Like, doesn't matter where I go, I just wind up on the heretics list. But it did feel lonely because I kind of was in this wandering stage. And I think you need to know that that's okay, that spot in between is actually kind of a beautiful and sacred space in a biblical tradition, which, if that's what you come from, there are stories over and over again of the wilderness and of the darkness and of the dark night of the soul. In fact, Barbara Brown Taylor's book, Learning to Walk in the Dark, is an absolute treat. If people haven't read that, you should read that book. It's beautiful. Because it really kind of it sings a song into places where I really need to hear you aren't alone, and this darkness you feel and this like brokenness you feel. This is where the good stuff happens. This is where the divine is still at play. And you are not going to be overwhelmed. So I think there are plenty of resources out there now. I think, when I think I first started to deconstruct, that didn't really exist as a word. I think you said that, Gary Allen, as we were setting up this thing. It didn't exist. But I think, there's the liturgists, and liturgists have tons of online Facebook communities all over the place for single folks, for people looking for community. There's podcasts galore out there. There's books to devour, and there are things that pop up, like even outside of Asheville, North Carolina, where Flamy is from, there's the Wild Goose Festival that happens every single year out there in the woods. And that's a bunch of, I like to say it's sort of the Christian Burning Man, a bunch of Christian hippies sort of out in the woods, dealing into justice and activism and music and art. It's a great space. So there are places, and I think being able to pursue them and just kind of start to plug in and allowing yourself time to figure that out. And I think the other thing I guess I will say is, and you said, Gary Allen, you're at a Episcopal church. Mm-hmm. I think for a lot of people there is this fear, right, that we want to step away. We have some questions, and some part of it is deconstructed, and yet we've been told over and over again that them, right, the other. I mean, for me in the Christadelphian movement, the Catholics were the whore of Babylon. Like that was what we would describe people of in the Book of Revelation. Like the Catholics were the worst. And so for me, being attracted to Franciscan theology was like, oh my God, I really am going to hell.
Yeah.
But I didn't even really believe in hell, but I think that was kind of funny. But I think that we're sort of always afraid of the thing that doesn't feel familiar. And I think there is so much to learn on that side. Like it may not feel right, because I think a lot of, more progressive mainline traditions feel more conservative in hymns and kind of this liturgy, and it feels more stuffy compared to like, your fun evangelical band with the guitars and it's loud, music on Sunday mornings. But there's some beauty to be found there too. And I think as you kind of wander through all those places, you integrate parts of yourself and you find the things that you like, and you can, choose bits and pieces, and you don't have to find the whole answer in one place. there's lots of belonging to be had. And I think what we've learned in the pandemic year is there's a lot of belonging to be had online as well. And community, whilst I do absolutely love and miss, humans in person, and the feeling of the bodies in a room, we've found a lot of people through Heathen Happy Hour and through Sojourn Grace Collective over the last year who were just starving and thirsty for a drop of community. And we've actually been able to build, relationships with those folks and have really meaningful connections with people that have never really seen their faces yet, and sometimes they'll pop up, we'll do it on communion on Sunday morning. One of our friends from Minneapolis hopped on and got to see her face move for the first time with her, like her voice coming out of her mouth. And it was so incredible because we're like, wow, we've known this human for almost 12 months. So I think there's a variety of ways to do it. And there's, I think just giving yourself the grace as you're kind of undergoing that period of, that liminal space, that in-betweenness. I think it's gonna be okay.
It's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that brings up an interesting point, because one of the things I've started realizing recently is that I don't understand community outside of forced conformity. Like Gary Allen kind of mentioned that. Like, I don't know how to define community without that forced conformity aspect of, like, you're accepted here because you vote like we do, or because you believe all the same things we believe, or you only affirm certain types of sexual relationships and everything else is out. You're accepted because of that. And as soon as I am around someone who just says, like you said, like, come as you are, and I'm not going to try to change you, I'm like,
gaslighting
does not compute. I don't know what to do now. And then, so then you step out of line and you get labeled an apostate or a heathen or a heretic or sinner or whatever or they tell you, like you said, you're destined for hell now. And so I think one of the things I really appreciate about what you guys are doing with Heathen is you're owning those labels and saying, like, sure, yeah, I'm a heathen, I'm an apostate, I don't care, and then you're telling other people, like, you don't even have to believe that we accept you as you are, you can still come. So how has, like, being part of that Heathen podcast and meeting all these people changed you in terms of how you understand community, but then also how has it helped you to be in community better, if that makes sense? This is for either of you.
Yeah, you've already you've met Karen and Anissa, right? You've had your conversation with them. Okay, so you've met the better half of this team, and you know that Karen in particular is just this master, like, space holder, space maker, generous human being who can stand in places where where even she might be being attacked, and just still hold space for that person. And I am on the other end of that spectrum, and I am the trigger happy block button, like, oh, I'm sorry, you just started preaching to me on the Heathen account, nope, no more access for you, kind of thing. And so I like being in relationship with these four people, and then our extended community, our little church here. Like, I am slowly learning how to do that better, because I'm like you. I don't understand. I don't understand community outside of the forced conformity, because I was on one side of it for so long, and now that I'm on the other side of it, I just have this like bodily, very physical reaction that just takes over anytime I encounter someone who tells me or tells anybody I love, that who they are, how they're being, or what they're saying is, somehow not accepted, somehow going to get them in some kind of trouble. And I just like, I just feel like I'm on the flip side of it now. And I just like want want all of those people out of my community, right?
Yep.
And it is hard freaking work. And some are better suited, I think, than others. Personality comes into it, obviously, but it is. I walk a fine line with it because especially for queer folks, I'm very like careful to make sure that I never tell a queer person that they need to make space for someone who doesn't accept and embrace their full identity, because
Right.
First of all, most of us did that for the first half of our lives, and so you're good. You've done that work already. Like you get a pass for a little bit, and you need your time and your space to heal and to even know who you are fully. You need to sometimes be removed from places where you're being told that all these different aspects of your identity are unwelcome or unworthy. And at the same time, I've been challenged by other people in our church, queer folks in our church, who I've told this story. We've written a song about it actually a bunch of times on our show, but about a night in a queer small group through our church where we sat around. Sat in a circle and went around the room answering a question that was, I think the question was, how did you reconcile, or how do you reconcile your faith and your sexuality? And I, being the loud and obnoxious, arrogant person I am, was the first to answer and threw up my hand. And I said, I don't have to reconcile my spirituality and my sexuality, because I left my faith and I don't take the word Christian anymore. And that's how I did it. There's no reconciliation needed. Answered that one easily. And then I kind of just shrunk down into my seat as the rest of the folks took their thoughtful, well-calibrated responses around the room, and they all had some version of, listen, it's really, really hard, but the reason I stick around and I stay in these spiritual spaces in my church and in whatever context that they're not fully evacuating, like, I do that because if I do evacuate, then it leaves this void, it leaves this vacuum that I know who's going to fill that vacuum. Like, I know the predominant way of thinking that controls the groupthink of the church that I'm involved in. And if I leave, then there's no other voice left for any other queer kid who may be closeted, who may not even understand their sexuality yet. Like, they're going to grow up and have the same oppression that I endured. And at the very least, if I can be that voice, be that space maker, be that safe person in that community, then I feel like I'm doing some good there. And man, that humbled me. And I'm still always being humbled, because if I had my way, if I had my gut reaction way, I would just evacuate entirely and get the hell out and burn evangelicalism down and just start fresh. And
I mean, you can do that too if you want to.
Thank you, Gary Allen. Sometimes, some days,
we just like playing with matches a lot.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're speaking to is really beautiful, because it provides diversity within the group, and we need your voice. And I mean, I guess maybe we need their voice too. I was thinking about that this morning in terms of what might it look like for the Christian community to hold space with the most ardent evangelical on the same table or in the same pew, have Flamy Grant sitting there. And maybe, just maybe, that is what the body of Christ is supposed to look like. And that, I kind of found myself in this situation in church several years ago, as I began to realize, like, wow, they are actually allowing space for me to be here, this progressive, affirming person. And as much as I really want to judge the guy sitting next to me, well, I guess I have to leave space for him too. And it's humbling, because maybe we all need each other to become who we are really supposed to be. And it feels like that it's easy for sort of those of us who have been, I would say, enlightened, to almost have our own version of fundamentalism. And that's probably not good either, so it's hard though. It's hard because you judge the group you left the worst, right? Because you're like, well, I figured it out. Why can't you idiots figure it out? This is evil.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That's what I struggle with.
I think there's some caveats to that statement. I agree with you. I think to me, I there's part of me that is always trying to look for space for the conservatives I grew up around. And I think I'm at that stage now of my life, midlife, where I'm asking a bunch of different questions, and I am trying to find my way back to some relationship with family in some really practical ways, and try and find some forgiveness, and some healing there. Because I feel like a lot of my hard-heartedness, it was hurting myself, honestly. Like, just the anger was directed inwards at myself, and if I can't figure out how to forgive, I feel it's backwards. A lot of people are like, oh, you've learned to forgive, yourself, and so you can learn to forgive others. I feel like I need to learn to forgive others so I can forgive myself, is kind of the way I'm looking at the moment. But we had a really dear friend of ours, Colby Martin, who, with his partner Kate, pastors our little unicorn church. He has so much space for the conversation with evangelicals. And so he has recently been on a couple of YouTubes where he will sit down with conservative pastors and have this conversation. And the other day, we woke up to him sharing this little this moment on Instagram where another progressive pastor had shared a clip from his latest 2-hour conversation, which I don't have time to sit there and listen to things for 2 hours. I find it after about 20 minutes, my head explodes like the aliens in Mars Attacks, and I just, all I see is red, and I want to kill and burn things. But this, thankfully, this little progressive pastor just chopped out just a 2-minute little clip of it, in which this conservative pastor says to Colby's face, there are people that God doesn't love. And I'm like, you know what? You've crossed a fucking line for me.
Right, exactly.
Because you can be conservative all you like. You can salute the flag. You can, you can protect your guns and all the shit that I really don't really kind of agree with or understand, honestly.
Right.
And I can have some humility around the stuff that I just wasn't raised in this culture on this continent. I do not understand the Second Amendment thing at all. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. And by the way, also raised in a socialist country. So, seeing the benefits
yay healthcare.
Exactly. Yay healthcare. Yay education. I wouldn't be here talking to you guys if it wasn't for that stuff. And, I cannot stand with people who tell me or other people that they're not loved, or a worse version, that God doesn't love them. That to me is such a heresy. Or you're the holy heretics. That is an absolute heresy. If you just take it on face value, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten son that he might believe him to be saved. If you just I don't know, I've been so long away from some of these ideas. I'm just like, hang on, I thought God still loved those people, but if they choose not to be saved, if they chose a different way, then God doesn't necessarily have some sort of choice, but God is kind of brokenhearted about the fact that some of these people don't choose the way. And I'm like, maybe it wasn't that. Maybe explicitly underneath all that, I was kind of right that these people were saying that God hates people. And I'm just kind of like, I can't live with that. If we have to have some dialogue, if we create some space, we have to agree on a few ground rules. Yeah. And one of them is every single fucking person on this planet was created in the image of the divine and in the image of a loving God. And if we don't start from the inherent, worth of every single person and every single creature, then we're just going to have a slippery slope conversation where we're not going to end up agreeing on anything. So that's where I think I draw a bit of a line.
No, I love that, and I think that forced unity is conformity. It's like, wait, I don't have to be in a relationship with a predator.
Yes.
I don't have to be in community with someone who does not value my existence, and in fact is working very diligently, both personally and publicly, to dehumanize me at every level of the game. Like, I thank you. No, I'm not going to do that, and I think that's that weird tension. So, all right, we've actually made it this far in the conversation, and we haven't talked about sex or drag queens. Like, what is our problem? What's going on here? So let's do that really quickly. I want to talk a little bit about just the whole notion of sexuality, and in particular, how if you grew up in the evangelical church and even more fundamentalist expressions that it sounds like both Ben and Flamy you did, we were hammered with the belief of original sin, that you were born evil, that your desires were evil. We were told to suppress all of our sexuality and our feelings, and don't trust your heart, don't trust your gut, and basically just kind of white knuckle your way through this whole infleshed, embodied experience. And that kind of reminded me of, I'm a big Walt Whitman fan, and at one point in his writings, he just stands there and says, "I celebrate myself."
Yes.
I mean, what an audacious, delicious claim, right? So if you've been indoctrinated in a worldview that says, to disembody and hate yourself and hate your sexuality and suppress everything, and then you come out of that in beautiful liberation, I mean, tell us about what that feels like to live into everything that you were made to be, enfleshed, embodied, sexually, all of that, because so many of us are still not there. We've not tasted that freedom.
Oh, I want that for y'all. I do, because here's the thing, like the more you do it, and the more you do stand proudly and say, "I celebrate myself," the further away you get from the shame that it lives in us, right? That is just like implanted in us at birth, and to the point where when I do encounter it in its most like virulent form, which usually happens online nowadays. Let's be honest. When someone, I was just doing a TikTok live last night where it was lovely. I was just putting on my makeup and talking with like 8 people, and then all of a sudden, I don't know what happened in the algorithm, but my viewer count shot up to like 200 people, and it was all like just Trump 2024. It was people coming in and be like, "What is this man doing? Do you know you're a man? What's your relationship with your father like?"
Oh my!
It was unbelievable, and to the point where when I encountered all that, I'm just like, I forget. I just truly, genuinely forget now what it's like to be so encased in layers of shame that the best you can do is project it onto someone else and call out the what you consider aberrant in other people, and it can be shocking. Like I mean, I'm fine. Like it was not. I'm not affected by that, but the way it did affect me is just like the recall, like I forget that shame gets that heavy. And so the more you practice embodied living, the more you work with your own intuition and work with your own body and learn to trust yourself, and to the verse that plagued me for forever was, "The heart is deceitful above all things." It was my mom. I feel like it was my mom's favorite. She said it all the time to me. Anytime I had anything that she considered questionable, and my answer was, "Well, I want to," or "It sounds fun," or what. She's like, "Well, the heart is deceitful above all things." And what is that's a mistranslation, right? It's actually the mistranslation is because it's the version I had growing up. It was who can understand it, or
ways, or
who can know it.
Who can know it? Yeah. And that's a mistranslation, I believe, because it's actually, or a better way of saying it was. I can't remember. Well, I fucked that one up, but whatever, it's fine. The point being, the more that you can practice that embodied living, the more like the less sense all of that shame ends up making, and truly the less weight you carry, because you just like I said, when you encounter it, it's unfathomable almost, and it genuinely does now at this point in my life create more empathy in me and more sympathy for people who are carrying that weight still, than it does like anger at them, because it used to make me mad. I used to have really strong reactions and be like, no, like I am a whole person, and you have to accept me, and like and now I'm just like, I don't know, I just have more of a strong, sure sense of self, and I don't need a bunch of evangelicals to accept me. But man, it would be nice for them if they could experience some of the liberation. There we are, liberation that I've felt. I feel like I'm supposed to be talking about sex and drag right now, and we're not there yet. Are we?
Well, I feel like we are. I mean, I think for me, years ago, when we're kind of doing our work in New York in the church, and kind of this completely bold statement of just like, you are accepted, you just belong as you are, and you're it's not more than being like invited or welcomed. It's got to go beyond that language. Like every single Sunday we say at Center and Grace, like all of you is celebrated here. It's not welcomed. It does need to shift. That language needs to go into other places. And I think I'm a heterosexual cis white guy, and the work I saw my queer friends doing, I was like, it is the holiest of work, because it is what we all need to do, because all of us need to come out and be ourselves. And I think, the kind of the rage that Flamy encounters online, the rage, many of us encounter online, is simply because I think I remember partly some of this kind of feelings of jealousy of, why does that person get to be that way? That the forced conformity that we have just swallowed down and pushed down and internalized to me is this kind of sense of just like, I can't be myself. If I'm myself, I will get rejected. Like that shame is so deep for so many of us, that to actually live like naked and unashamed, to just be ourselves, is hard work. And I think for me, like, it's hilarious because the biblical story over and over again describes, come out from among you and be my people. Like there's this cry all of the time to like come out from under place of oppression, and to live in the promised land. Like so much of that story to me has this like overall metaphorical thing of just like, live in a garden, not in a prison. Like just come out from those places where you feel locked down. And so I think, I think the other part of that is we're having a huge shift of the last 10 years around just gender expression, full stop. That I don't think was not a part of my conversation my teenage years. And that were you allowed to exist on a spectrum, in the belonging book that I talked about earlier that we read, there was a particular chapter that was super like powerful for me, because it was talking about sort of old classical notions from the Greek world around eros and logos, and that these two ideas are gendered. So logos has this kind of male energy, and it's like rational and straight lined, and has this energy that's going forward in this sort of more aggressive kind of way. And then there's eros, which is kind of more the feminine and is curious and circular. And I was reading this chapter being like, this is how my internal world works. My world is eros. Like internally, like identify more with what I think of these classical traits of feminism that we've kind of put onto the world. And so I think understanding that we are legion, like in ourselves, there is so much diversity of things that we like and things that we don't like and things we're afraid of and things that we kind of little kinks that we have, and you're allowed to be that person. And I think that's where I think, queer folks kind of having voices in spaces of faith, and being loud and being exactly who they are and being colorful, or being quiet, the little quiet gays like a Hannah Gadsby,
Where do the quiet gays go?
But just being who you are entirely is just, I don't know. It to me, on the other side of it, like when I see people who are fully who they are, I'm just like, you go. Like I just I feel better about being in the world when I watch someone unashamed.
Yeah, like another Walt Whitman quote. Do I contradict myself? Fine, I contain multitudes. Just be all of it, embody all of it. And I think for me, like drag is kind of that lighthouse. It's that beacon. It's this exaggerated, outlandish, absurd version of whatever drag you're doing. I think most people, when they think drag, it's like this extreme femininity, and that's that's what I'm doing. And but it's because it's so hard, so freaking hard. We've made it so difficult for people to even just begin the thought process of exiting a toxic culture, a toxic religion, because of the shame around it, because of the fear of loss, all the things that you stand to lose, which for someone like me, it was literally everything. It was family. It was my place in my community. It was my path to education. It was all of my future. It was just everything. And so it's really, really difficult to even start thinking about how I could disentangle myself and find some breathing room. So for me, drag is like we need drag because we need extreme, bright beacons that are calling out to people in the furthest reaches who don't have the options haven't been presented to them. So that's if I can do that for anybody with a giant wig and lipstick that takes up half my face, like I'm thrilled that is a way that some queer kid who at least has some internet access, but maybe nothing else in their immediate world around them, that feels like home or feels like something they would recognize. They can see that and be like, okay, like something's out there. There is something beyond my experience here. Cause I just, I didn't have that. We were like, TV was off limits. I wasn't allowed to listen to music that wasn't at the carpenter shop Christian bookstore down the road. Like, so, thank God Amy Grant did become a pop star, because that was probably my initial, realization that there is a world beyond, the bubble that I had been kept in. So
I just want to say that I think you're helping more than just the queer population, because as a cishet white woman who was raised in evangelicalism in a culture that not only didn't celebrate people, they suppressed individual characteristics and only accepted certain ones. I am still not at a place where I can say I celebrate every part of who I am. And so when you see anyone who can do that, it makes your heart sing in a moment of hope of like, maybe I can get there. Maybe I can not just like tolerate who I am, but I can celebrate who I am. And that gives me incredible hope, because like I said, I don't know yet how to comprehend community without forced conformity. And I don't think I know how to comprehend myself in that light of just full acceptance. So I think what you guys are doing, both like all four of you on the show, but then Flamy, you in your drag on TikTok, like all of it, I think it is like you said, to use your word, liberating for a lot of people in ways that we didn't even know we needed to be liberated. So thank you for that. Yep. And I feel like we could keep talking about this forever, but since I mentioned hope, I would like to ask both of you, from your vantage point, from your experience, from leaving and getting out and finding real community and acceptance and then being celebrated, when both of you look at the future of faith, what, if anything, gives you hope?
I think my mind is a little back. I might go back before I go forwards with this on what you just said. I remember several years ago sitting in my apartment when I was first married, and the Olympics was on. And I'm a musician, so I'm not classically sporty, but actually I enjoy I enjoy sports, and I enjoy that kind of stuff. But this is the first time I think I had sat in front of sports and lost my mind, because there was in my memory, a Russian wrestler, just this huge burly dude. Oh, not a wrestler, sorry. He was a weightlifter. This huge burly dude, who was stepping up to take on an extraordinary amount of weight. And as they were kind of setting up, the commentators are talking that usual like Olympics kind of thing where it's slightly NPR, and they're being very, very clipped about it. And it's like, well, this is what's his face. And, he has this huge story. And then they told this story about how he had lost his wife like a year earlier in a tragic accident and had to push through his training to kind of get to this place. So they set this up beautifully. And obviously it appealed to my Enneagram fairness, but he lifts the bar, wins the gold medal. And then his coach, who's it looks like his dad, like the same burly dude, comes bounding up onto stage, and these two men pile on top of each other and just weep. I'm going to lose this. I tell the story, but and for me, some part of it was like, here is somebody doing something that they absolutely love in spite of all of the things that life has thrown at them, and they've stuck to this thing, and it's just like the victory in itself to push through that kind of grief and to show up and to keep going and to kind of watch the love obviously between these two people was extraordinary. And I think that's my hope. My hope is that we kind of get to a world where when we see someone like authentically walk around the world, we go, yeah, and we cheer that person on, and we absolutely kind of, you go girl, like whatever it is, like just telling people that I see you. Like it's that classic kind of African phrase when people kind of look at each other and say, I see you, that we can actually really tell authenticity for what it is, and to kind of to celebrate that, and to kind of say, you're good as you are in this moment doing this thing. Like that's amazing. Like one of my dear friends, Nikki Lerner, who's an African-American worship leader in Baltimore, one of the things she introduced me culturally to was this idea that you throw a shoe at someone who's doing really well. So if someone's burning it down on stage, you take off your shoe and you throw it at them. And it's just, it is this kind of complete, it's this gesture of honor, of you're killing it, you're just burning it down. And I kind of want that on a Sunday morning. I just want people to be throwing shoes at the stage when someone's preaching the truth and someone's getting up there and telling you that you're a loved child of God. So that's kind of what I want, is just being able for everyone to be authentic and for it to be celebrated.
Yeah, and celebrating all parts of it, including I think everything you just said, Ben, totally applies to your confession just now, Melanie. I was Gary Allen, you made me cry before we even started recording. And Melanie, I was crying over here in the corner quietly while you were talking about how the hardship of even embracing the full self even now, and I celebrate that. That gives me hope that you're out here on a microphone, putting that into the world and making that space for other people who are going through that same exact struggle. So shoe at you right now. I think there is a lot that gives me hope. I mean, our little community here of Sojourn Grace gives me hope. I'm not, I have, done the formal renunciation or whatever of, the term Christian. And it's just not a thing I can carry around, a label I can have right now. But I'm surrounded by people who are doing that work. And Ben mentioned Colby, who just goes online and talks to evangelicals with love and acceptance and just bright eyes. And I watch that, and I'm in the comment section going, "You assholes, lay off of him! You don't even know him. You don't know the work he's doing." So I think there's a lot of reason for hope, because there are people who are somehow equipped and game to do that work, and I those are the people I want to throw shoes at, and then also just because of the experiences we've had at Heathen, talking with our guests. One of the things we always try to close with is what's working for you now spiritually. What does your spiritual practice look like? What are the things that you do? And we've gotten some outrageous answers about aliens, and we've gotten some awesome practical stuff about, not that Tess, if you ever hear this, I love you, girl. But we've gotten some really just practical stuff too, like just yoga and meditation and that kind of work. And what I've done in the process of recording Heathen is just take those things from people when they say, this is what works for me. And I usually give it a try, and a lot of times it ends up sticking and becomes part of my own practice. And I think, we have the ability to build the spirituality and the practices that work for us. And why wouldn't we? Why not? So
I think one of the things that Flamy talks about often, and I love this, is saying part of Heathen is us in the moment as people saying, this is what I believe in, or this is what I stand for, and us saying, we believe that with you.
Yeah.
And it might be divergent from kind of where we're at, or kind of, not part of our tradition. And yet it's just exciting hearing. I just love hearing people say that stuff.
Yeah.
Like I was reminded the other day, Krista Berg was an artist I absolutely loved. Growing Up, Lady in Red was the song I discovered first. And then there's a whole album, Spark to the Flame, that I still know by heart because I listened to it on my run the other day. And I'm like, I know every single part of this record back to front. But there's a song I'd forgotten about on the record called The Spaceman Came Traveling. And it's a Christmas song, but from kind of the vantage point of this space person traveling over time and sort of arriving at the moment of Jesus' birth and sort of being a witness to that. So it's like the star, but embodying that star as an alien traveling through the world. And because of that conversation with Tess, I was like, that's awesome. And it's so cool. And I love the tune so much. I'm like, I probably should just cover that and put that out this year as a Christmas song.
Do it.
Like that's such a Heathen thing to do.
Yeah.
But I just think some part, getting excited when other people getting excited and meeting them there in that moment. And I think that's really beautiful. I think that's where we could find some common ground. Like I think there's ways that we can get excited about immigration in this country. There's ways that we can get excited about things that pull us apart if we just stop and try to listen and then kind of find some stuff and then all agree that it's the commonality of our humanity that kind of that really unites us, not necessarily kind of some of the ideological things that we stick to, that we're still allowed to believe in the privacy of our bedrooms.
Right. So. Well, I just want to celebrate the fact that you both are you both have a prophetic voice and a prophetic posture. And I know that word is really loaded, but the way I'm using it now is Walter Brueggemann is an Old Testament scholar, and he said the prophet nurtures, nourishes, and evokes a different consciousness, an alternative to the dominant culture or to the dominant way of being. And I mean, what if drag is the modern prophet? What if drag is saying, guys, there's a whole other way of seeing the world, of seeing yourself, and oh God, of seeing spirituality, and it might look something like this. And it, I think there's an element of invitation, of hope that you have been inviting people into an alternative way of seeing themselves in the world, and I think that is to be celebrated at every step of the game. So thank you for being a different vision, for having a different voice, for inviting so many of us into a different narrative that we can live into. And we could probably talk for the rest of the day, but
I'm sure we could.
But we always want to end our podcast with just some fun, silly, personal questions. So if you guys are still up for it, we'll end with some rapid fire questions, and we'll kind of go from there.
Oh boy,
lightning round.
All right.
Yes.
All right. So lightning round question. First one, because you live in San Diego and because everybody's cool in California, and I'm sure there's celebrities on every corner. Describe like the coolest celebrity encounter you've ever had.
I think we both have some good stories for this. This one's not cool, but it's fun. So I work for a theater here in town, and we did a couple years ago, we did a show that was written by Steve Martin and Edie Brickell.
Oh, wow.
And theater culture's the anti-corporate culture, right? Like you don't have to dress up to go into work, and I'm probably I am, not probably. I'm definitely a little more casual than some of my compadres at work. And so I have some slippers that I keep under my desk, like bedroom slippers, fuzzy slippers, because they're just more comfortable during the day. And if all I'm doing is sitting at a desk and occasionally walk into a copier, whatever, let me wear my slippers. Well, I took my slippers a little too far one day and walked downstairs to the vending machine. And on my way back up, I passed Steve Martin in a very narrow stairwell, and literally had to shift my body to make space for us both to get by. And he just looked down and looked back up and said, cool shoes.
That's awesome.
Amazing.
Oh, man.
I hadn't heard that story before. I love that.
All right, Ben, what about you?
I actually lived in New York for 7 years, in Brooklyn Heights. And so I ran into tons of people. I saw Paul Giamatti in an elevator at Brooklyn Heights at my subway stop, looking like he'd run into the devil and kind of been drinking all night with the devil, and then actually had tussled and lost and just dragged himself home. But I think my favorite celebrity story is I just started watching Felicity a couple of weeks ago, and I'd never watched it before. And of course, it's a young Kerry Russell. But Kerry Russell I saw all of the time in my neighborhood, and I'm glad I actually hadn't seen Felicity because I have a huge crush on her now, and it would have been awful if that. But one morning, as I kind of was moving our very, very sketchy church van and driving it down to set up church at 6:30 in the morning, I turned left onto Atlantic Avenue, and the sun was coming streaming down Atlantic Avenue in this kind of gorgeous way. It was springtime, and there was Kerry Russell on her hipster bike in the middle of the road, singing her absolute guts out, just with not a care in the world. And I almost ran over in our sketchy church van. I was just like, whoa, Kerry, watch out. But she just looked like the absolutely happiest human ever, 6:30 on a Sunday morning. I was just like, I went off to church with this like, man, what if we were all that happy on a Sunday morning? Because I didn't feel happy at that point.
That's amazing.
That's awesome.
Okay. Flamy, this question is for you because I was raised on Amy Grant Christmas. And I can still sing all the lyrics. So I'm curious, does Amy Grant know about you?
Listen, girl. This is my. I don't know. So
she does now. She listens to our podcast. So there you go.
Hey, hi Amy. Hello. Is this my audition? I do know that friends of Amy have found me and said, "Oh my gosh, I've got to send this to her," and that kind of thing. And there's a gay friends of Amy Grant group online, a little secret Facebook group that I didn't know existed. And they found me, and I squealed with delight when I discovered this group, because I was like, "Oh my gosh, my people! I've been looking my whole life, and you were here all along." So I don't know. She may have probably seen a video at this point. I think enough people have probably sent things along. But the thing is, I don't really do an Amy Grant impersonation. It's more of an homage to her and my upbringing. So I don't ever want her to feel like I'm trying to encroach on her territory. I very much respect you. And yeah, I'm just over here doing my own thing. Love you, Amy.
I actually worked with her a few years ago back at Wild Goose
really?
Festival. The very final sending ceremony. I produced that and kind of did the thing, and Amy kind of sang a song and then jumped up. It was time for communion. I mean, there's thousands of people in this field, and at that point, it's the end of the whole weekend, so everyone's very dirty, and everyone's very tired, very smelly. And there's an invitation from one of my friends who's a queer chaplain in Chicago, who kind of did the most beautiful call to communion. And it was, of course, it's open for every single person here. And Amy walked from side stage and walked up to actually hold the communion elements and serve them to people, which was incredible. Leaders don't do that kind of stuff, right? Like, she should be back in the green room, doing her thing. And I remember all weekend there had been this wonderful little whisper person who was floating around in a gold lame head to foot outfit with big wings and this whole thing. And this sprite of a human came to the communion table just sobbing. And Amy took her kind of thing that she was holding, full of bread, and gave it to someone, and then gave this person a hug. And I was like, I see you, Amy.
That's cool.
I see you.
That's my favorite story. I love that so much.
She was like the original heretic, original heathen,
Yeah.
that was the first one I ever heard about. Like, oh, now we can't listen to her music.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, you just try, Mom. You just try to take away my immigrant CDs.
All right, Ben, I know you're a craft beer connoisseur. So can you tell us what your favorite beer is and who makes it?
Oh boy, I can tell you what style is my favorite. I love a super dark Russian Imperial Stout that is 14.5%. Like the more alcohol, the better. The richer, the darker, the sludgier. I think my favorite brewery in the world is Harveston Brewery, which is in Scotland, and they make dark beer in aged Scotch barrels. And every time I have one of their beers, I have a divine experience.
Meanwhile, I'm the one who's married to a brewer, and I hate beer. So I'm very grateful that we share house space with Ben, because my husband can take all of his beer stuff and share that with Ben. They can have fun together. Awesome. I'll be over here drinking a pink cocktail.
Okay. Yeah, this one's for both of you. What was your childhood nickname?
Ooh, my grandfather on my mother's side called me BJ Squeaks or BJ Squeaks.
What? What?
But I had 1,000 nicknames. I was the guy that just always people didn't call me by my name.
That's an Australian thing too, right? Like everybody has a nickname.
Absolutely. And I try so hard to give Karen a nickname, and she really doesn't like anything I come up with. So it's kind of a point of tension in our relationship where I'm constantly trying something. She's like, I don't like that.
Oh my goodness. Where did BJ Squeaks come from?
Well, my middle name was John, which was his middle name. So he went by John Martin. His name was actually Alan John Martin, but he was known, by John Martin. And so my middle name was John after him, and we had a very, very fraught relationship. And recently, when I changed my name, I got rid of the John. But BJ was kind of something. In fact, my cousin the other day when I talked to him on Zoom, he called me BJ, and I was like, I'm not BJ anymore. That's not there. I took that initial out. So
nice, Flamy.
I've the whole time Ben's talking, I'm trying to rack my brain to think, did I have a childhood nickname? And I honestly don't think I did. And I think the reason why is because, so my birth name is Matthew, and my mom was so insistent my whole life growing up that people call me Matthew and never Matt and never Maddie and never anything other than Matthew. And to the point where, I will correct people, real quickly now. Even now, if I say hi, I'm Matthew, and they're like, "Oh, hi, Matt," I'm like, "No, that's not what I said."
Exactly.
So we didn't do nicknames. I was
any pet names, like family names, or things you would call each other, or affectionate things.
I mean, no. My sister was Squirrely Girl. I didn't have anything cute like that.
Wow. Yeah, my family, we don't call each other by our names ever. Like my older sister and I, we just call each other woman. That's it.
Woman. Wow. That's very tribal.
My ex used to call me husband, but that was something very different. It's always an edge.
All right. Last question for both of you. What is one thing you've done or accomplished that you are the most proud of?
I mean, honestly, for me, it really is just it's creating the podcast, and my pride is weird in it because I feel like I just literally the only thing I did was roll a tape, but then here we are 5 years later. I don't know how, I can't do math. And there's just a community of people around me who I love and adore, and I feel so supported by, and I don't know how that happened, but I know that I bought a domain name, heathenpodcast.com, and the next thing I know, there's just a community of people who've enabled me to really truly fully become the person that I always wanted to be as a little kid. I have memories of putting on high heels and playing with my mom's lipstick at 3 and 4, and then that stuff just got squashed in me so quickly, and I never revisited it until my late 30s, and I couldn't have done that without the people around me. So I guess I'm just proud to have the friends I do.
Yeah, they're pretty good. It's a pretty good collection of humans. You guys should come hang out with us.
Yeah.
Love that.
I I feel like what flashed in my head was all the different points of different things I would have said I'm proud of. And I think right now, like last year, September, I put out my first album, like full-length album, and I've been a musician for 20 years, and I've helped a lot of other people make records, and I've made records, with bands, and I've produced for other people, and I made a lot of Christian records, so I spent a lot of my time like building up other people's empires, and then last year, September, was a 2-year period, so from 2018, I started in March, put the first song out, and kind of was releasing songs every other month. And that was in the middle of my life falling apart, living in New York, my marriage falling apart, the church I started, getting kicked out of that. And so it was a really shitty period of my life, quite honestly. And I'm so grateful to have a therapist who kind of walked me through that and held my hand through that whole thing. And but to me, to put an album out in the middle of all of that, when I just felt like I was like hanging on by the back of my skin of my teeth, felt like a huge accomplishment. And I think, the record starts with a song which basically kind of starts with a lyric. This is my part of the story, and I'm sticking to this tune. And so I feel like, here I am, very similar, I think, to Flamy, like in my I'm in my early 40s. I'm not in my late 30s anymore. but here I am in this kind of second half of life, like actually discovering what it's like to be me. And it feels emotional and crazy, because I feel like I spent most of my life trying to figure out who God was, right? Like we externalize so much of that. We're just like, that journey is the most important journey for you to know God. And like now I'm on a journey to, like, when my life fell apart, I think one of the things I said publicly before is I looked at myself in the mirror, and the question, I deconstructed enough of God, I think, to understand that I wasn't going to be condemned for what I did. But the question I had wasn't who was God in this situation. The question was, who was I? I just had no clue. And so I think, I've been fighting really hard the last couple of years to do that. And I'm privileged to then do that in community with people and watch other people like grapple for that same kind of thing, and to allow the space with Heathen Podcast for people to tell their damn stories and just like get to their truth. And so that's the thing I'm most proud of, is telling mine and then giving space for other people to tell theirs.
Wow.
And if you haven't heard that album yet, kids, go listen to As If Words Could Heal the Wounds by Ben Grace on Spotify. It's great. It's so good. It's a phenomenal album for all kinds of things, but certainly for deconstruction and for a path back to self and embodiment and all of those things. It's gorgeous music, and you should be proud of it.
Look at us just kind of give each other shout outs.
That's all. That's the only reason we started Heathen, is just to promote each other's shit.
I love it. All right, Ben and Flamy, this has been so incredible. And I think one of the beautiful things about the deconstruction community is there's no competition. We simply want to invite everyone in to say, you belong. And then come find your tribe, and maybe it's over here, maybe it's over there. So for people who want to join your tribe and be about what you guys are doing, where can they find more about you?
Well, we're at Heathen Podcast on all the social media places, and heathenpodcast.com is the website, and from there you can link to all the platforms where you can listen to us. And then we have a little private Facebook group as well, if you're looking for a space that we intentionally keep it private, just for folks who might be in situations where they're not comfortable yet letting anybody around them know that they're having these on this deconstruction journey, and they don't feel safe yet. So it's a private place where we can have those conversations. So for that, you can just email us, askheathen@gmail.com.
I'm going to make sure to put all of this in the show notes as well, so people can find it there in one place. And I will also link to your album, Ben, so everybody can find all of that in one spot. You guys, thank you so much for your time today.
So wonderful.
I
Thank
was
y'all.
crying tears of my own here, and I was not expecting that. And so I really appreciate your thoughts and your hearts, and just being willing to be a safe place for people, because we often don't realize how much we need that. So thank you.
Thank y'all. We appreciate the work you're doing. And this was a beautiful conversation. I loved it.
This was one of my favorites we've had recently. So thank you guys.
I'm not crying. You're crying. Aren't they just such beautiful, kind, loving people? I mean, they are truly amazing. So please make sure to check out their show. Just search Heathen Podcast. I almost said Holy Heretics because I'm so used to it. Search Heathen Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to sign up for our digital course, Making Sense of the Bible Post-Deconstruction. You can head to www.sophiasociety.org and tap on that announcement bar at the top to learn all the details and to become a patron of the show. And don't forget, that's Sophia with a PH, so SOPHIA society.org. Next week, we are talking with another wonderful person, and her name is Kelly Lamb. She is starting a new podcast with Josh Harris. Yes, that Josh Harris. And so we're having her on the show to chat about her journey toward embracing the leader that she's meant to be, despite the patriarchy trying to stifle her every step of the way. If you're a woman or you know women, so everybody, you should want to listen to this episode. Hit the subscribe or follow button on your podcast app so you don't miss it. Do it. Do it right now. And until then, have a great week. This episode was produced by the Sophia Society. Music is by Faith in Foxholes, and sound engineering is by Joshua Mudge.